Hey all, hope all is well. It's been a long time since I've done a video. I've been traveling quite a bit, and I definitely want to continue this series that I started. So here we go. In this video, I'm going to be covering my round 7 game from the Bay Area International in January actually. And if you have seen the previous videos in this series, and at least the round 6 video, you'll know that it's been a rough outing. I haven't been feeling so great. This actually is going to be kind of a persistent theme over the course of 2019 as I've been battling some serious health issues, and it's kind of affected my play. But in any case, I'm a fighter, and I've tried to push through. And in this game, I was white after my last round draw. I'm white here against Nikhil Kumar, a young, talented, I think FM. So he's probably around like 2,300 or so. So without further ado, let's get started. So I was white, so I opened with c4. Not typically a move I open with, but I had some ideas. E6, knight c3, d5. And the reason I actually opened with this move order is because I noticed that Nikhil tended to play Queen's Gambit decline type of positions. And so I wanted to see if like playing c4 would sort of prompt him to do something different, because it's not something I do a lot. So that's something you do sometimes, is you play a move that's a little bit different than what you normally do, just to get them thinking a little bit earlier. So d5, d4. I kind of need to meet the d5 move, because now d4 is actually a threat for black. So my idea with playing d4 is actually to take that square. You can also play e3 and keep the diagonal open for this bishop one day. Maybe this bishop gets on this diagonal like that. It's a possibility. So anyways, I went d4, knight f6, knight f3, bishop e7. And this is Queen's Gambit decline territory. When they play d5, e6, and then bishop e7, it's Queen's Gambit decline. In this system, there are two kind of ways to play. One way is to put the bishop on f4. Another way is to put the bishop on g5. And another way is actually to play c takes d5 and play like the exchange variation. But it's not as challenging in this case, because if you play c takes d5, e takes d5 here, the bishop can very quickly get to f5 kind of unscathed. I could go queen c2, but then the thing is normally in the Queen's Gambit exchange, the knight wants to be on e2 instead of f3 to facilitate the f3 and e4 push. So in any case, I had another plan in mind, and I went bishop g5. So bishop g5, h6, bishop h4. I don't want to give that bishop for the knight. It's bishop takes f6 is a move, but essentially the bishop is a long-term asset, and it's not really desirable to give it up so quickly. I mean, this is a system like e3, castles, rook c1, b6, and then trade like this, but I think black is kind of fine here in the long term. Anyway, so h6, bishop h4, castles, e3, and then knight e4. And knight e4 is the beginning of what's called the Lasker variation. The Lasker variation is a long and storied history. I think actually the game that actually pops into my mind is actually the last game of the Topalov-Anand World Championship match, where where the score was tied going into the last round, and everyone was thinking tie breaks, tie breaks, tie breaks. And believe it or not, Anand won the game with black in this system after Topalov tried a little bit too hard to win. And usually the system has quite a solid reputation. The idea is that you trade a pair of minor pieces. So I took on e7, then queen takes. And then you're also going to trade the pair of knights momentarily. And black really has a solid setup and is arguing that, I'm kind of going to hold firm. I trade a few minor pieces to make up for my lack of space, and I'm going to be okay. And note that knight takes e4 is not actually desirable, because after d takes e4, knight d2, and f5, black has a pretty active position, and these double pawns aren't really a problem, believe it or not, because black can actually play e5 at some point, and also might even have attacking chances on the king side. So not really a thing to take there. So normally you try to come up with a useful waiting move. I played rook c1. The idea was that to put my rook on the c file and maybe recapture knight takes c3 with the rook. So c6 was played, solid move. This has been played before. And I went queen c2, another waiting move. The point is, again, that I don't want to capture on e4. I kind of want black to capture on c3 and release the tension. So I'm kind of making some development moves to delay that capture. The other thing you can ask is, why didn't you play the bishop out? Why didn't you just go bishop e2? Well, the reason for that is that I was sort of hoping that black would release the tension and take on c3. So like, and then I wouldn't have to waste a half tempo. So for instance, if I play bishop e2 now, let's say white takes here, black takes here, and then takes here. Now my bishop got to the c4 square, but it wound up going to e2 and then to c4. So it's kind of wasting a half tempo. I was trying to make a few moves not to waste that half tempo so that black would release the tension. So queen c2, knight c3. It's kind of obliged now to take because if you play f5 to reinforce the knight, the dark squares are kind of weak. So knight takes c3, queen takes, knight d7, developing, bishop e2 now. I kind of have no choice but to develop my pieces now. And now d takes c4. So Nikhil at the end pretty much got what they wanted from the standpoint that it was like, you know what, I was only going to take when that bishop moved, and I kind of ran out of useful moves to delay, so I wound up taking. And then queen takes c4. I played queen takes c4 because I kind of preferred the bishop on e2, but queen takes c4 does allow e5. The flip side is I could have played bishop takes c4, but what I've found is in a lot of these positions, then black decides to play b6 and bishop b7, and actually just plays for c5. And black has a really solid position, and this bishop actually is not really good on this diagonal because it's kind of blunted. Now, after queen takes c4, the b6 plan is not possible, so black plays for e5. So you can see like the two key plans are like e5 or c5. So e5, I castled. Oop, no, queen e6 was not played. I castled to keep that tension and kind of to invite e4, which wound up being played. The point is I was thinking, you know what, maybe I get a good French out of this. And in the meantime, when the position closed after e4, knight d2, I was thinking, now maybe I can get a minority attack going on the queen side. So that was my thought process. So knight f6 was played. It makes a lot of sense, trying to get the bishop out. And I played queen c5. The idea is that I saw bishop e6 was going to be played, so I was kind of preempting. Queen c5 was a preemptive move, and I thought that maybe trading the queens, I might be able to put some pressure on the queen side in an endgame. So rook e8 was played, and then I played b4. This was another key component of my plan. The point was that, well, if you take on c5 now, maybe I play b takes c5, and then I hammer down on the b file. So that was kind of the idea there, and then maybe my knight one day could land on d6. So queen takes c5 was not played, bishop e6 was played, and now I played queen takes e7. You could argue maybe I could have waited another move before trading, but I thought this was the right time. So I took and then went a3, and the idea was to kind of hold up the position a little bit. I was a little wary of playing a4 too quickly because I thought maybe this pawn is a little bit loose, and maybe there could be a move like a5, or even knight d5, but I don't know, it's tough to say. I played a3, bishop d5, kind of a solid move, protecting the e4 pawn, also protecting the c6 pawn, and then I went rook c2. And the idea was actually to not just think about doubling my rooks, but maybe even think about putting the rook on b1. So that was kind of the idea there. So knight e8, knight b1, that was the other little trick, was I thought maybe I could pressure this d5 bishop, knight d6, knight c3, and now bishop b3. And notice that not just leaving the bishop there is kind of undesirable. Like if you play a move like a6, now I can capture and play rook fc1, and I dominate the c file, and white would be better here. And now this d5 pawn would be a little bit loose, so I can even think about playing rook c5 one day. So because of that, black played bishop b3 because it couldn't stay there. And I went rook b2, and then bishop c4. Nice little nuance to tickle my my rook away from the c file and then hit my bishop. I played a4 because if I take on c4 right away, then there's knight takes c4 and my rook and pawn are attacked. So I played a4. And then black played a5, which I think is really well timed. The point is that if you allow me to take more space and play a move like a5, then it might be difficult to get any activity. So a5, b takes a5, bishop takes e2, rook takes e2. The reason I didn't take with the knight is because I wanted to retain protection of the a4 pawn. Rook takes e2, rook takes a5. And the dust has kind of settled a little bit, and it's kind of important to stop and see what's going on. We both have 6 pawns. We both have 2 pawn islands. I have this weak a4 pawn. Black maybe has a loose b7 pawn. I was kind of pinning my hopes on the fact that e4 might be a little bit weak and that the b7 pawn might be a little bit loose. But black is very, very solid here. So yeah, it's pretty close to equal. I played g3, giving my king an escape square and also, you know, kind of making a waiting move. You could also consider a move like h3. The idea that maybe my king could come out here and maybe I could prepare g4. Because what happens in this position is that, you know, black is probably going to go f5, reinforce that e4 pawn, and maybe even consider g5 as well. And the thing is I don't want this. I kind of want this e4 pawn to be a loner. The point is, if it's not reinforced by another pawn, then I might have pressure on it long term. So even though black has 2 pawn islands here, as long as this e4 pawn isn't really reinforced, it's kind of 3 pawn islands. So that was kind of what I was pinning my hopes on. So anyways, I played g3, knight c4, rook b1, stopping knight b6, rook a6, rook b4, hitting that knight, knight d6 back, and now king g2. Just a nice little move to tuck my king off the first rank, get out of any checks. f5. And I think this is a move I should have probably not allowed. So the reason for that is now it's going to be very difficult to get any pressure on the e4 pawn if f5 is kind of just constantly reinforced. So again, that's why I was saying earlier, maybe I played h3 and g4. f5 is not, doesn't cement the e4 square. Anyway, you live and you learn. So I played h4 to try and stop that advance because it kind of dawned on me that g5 and black taking more space on the queen side on the king side is not really what I want. So I went h4, g5 anyway. A trade happened, and then I went rook c2. And the idea with rook c2 was to kind of tease d5 in certain positions, because again, my rooks need some open files. They're operating on half open files, but I need to be able to infiltrate to get some type of interesting position. The flip side of that is that now that black has pushed his kingside pawns, maybe the king on g8 is potentially a little bit weak one day. So these are kind of like the hopes, the ideas I'm pinning my hopes on. So king g7, knight e2, rook e8, and rook c5. And notice this rook transfer, trying to get my rooks as active as possible before trying to break with d5. Rook a8 was played, and now I actually went for d5 right away. The reason I didn't wait was because if I play knight c3, then black actually has rook a5, and I'm forced to trade these rooks, and I didn't see any way to improve, really. Well, maybe I can leave my rook on c5, but I didn't see any clear way to improve. Maybe I could have improved. Maybe I could have played a move like g4 to undermine these pawns. I don't know. I'm not totally sure, but it just seemed like black was really solid here. And the other thing about it is if I don't trade the rooks, I can never play d5 because my rook on c5 is hanging. So tough to say. So anyways, I went d5, and the idea with d5 was that I would be getting rid of my a pawn after rook takes a4, but I would win back this pawn on c6, and all of a sudden my knight on d4 would have a nice square. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, in this 3 versus 3, my pieces would be active enough to get some counterplay. So after rook takes c6, knight f7 was played, and then I went knight c3, and it kind of dawned on me that I didn't have as much as I thought. Initially, a few moves back, I thought I was going to go knight d4, and I thought, oh, this f5 pawn is just a goner. And then I thought, okay, I might be able to press here. But then it just dawned on me, rook a5 covers everything, and I don't have any other way to attack the f5 pawn, and the black rook can kind of just shuffle. I'm kind of unfortunate. I thought it would be something more serious, but, you know, it wasn't. So, anyways, I went knight c3, rook a5 anyway, and now I went g4, trying to shift plans, thinking, you know what, if I undermine this pawn, and then the e5 pawn is weak, I'm going to have something. The thing is that black's just a little bit too well coordinated to really get anything really serious. But I tried. So g4, knight e5, great move. Rook c7 check, king f6. I trade naturally. And here, I was thinking, man, if I just win the e4 pawn somehow, I have a 2 versus 1 endgame with knights and rooks on the board, pretty good winning chances. But it's really tough to attack the e4 pawn with both pieces, and keep track of the f2 pawn as well, because black can sometimes get very good counterplay with knight g4 and a rook on the second rank. So I tried. I went rook c8, got my rook around, tried to put some pressure on the e4 pawn. And note here, I have 2 attackers, but black has 2 defenders, and I can't really dislodge the king. So I continued to try. I put my knight on e2 to threaten knight g3, but now knight f6, and again, now there are 3 defenders on the piece, and after a potential check, the king would just go back. So then I tried the g5 pawn, see if I could attack this, and black sort of parried that threat. And so then I tried to get from behind and get rook g7, and after rook e5, I can't actually get more pressure on the pawn without my knight hanging, so I went knight f8. And again, you can see I kind of went around, maneuvered around best I could, then got to this position where I was like pinning the king, and I kind of maximized my efforts, but alas, I couldn't win this game. And after rook e8, I actually offered a draw, because after rook e8, like, black can just protect the pawn with king f5, and there's just nothing going here. My king on g3 can't be involved in attacking the pawn, and even though black's pawns are split, I just can't get more than 1 attacker on it without mining my f2 pawn. So we agreed to a draw here. Very frustrating game, because I thought I squeezed pretty effectively. And the other thing I actually didn't mention early in the game is he was playing so fast. Like the first 15, 16 moves, he didn't use any time at all. And so, like, normally you get to a position where you're pressing and you're making them make a lot of defensive moves. They kind of break because they don't have a lot of time. And he effectively used his time so that he had more than enough time to deal with the positions where he had to defend a little bit. I could have been a little bit more patient with the breakthrough. I mean, if I go all the way back here, wow, this game was a lot of moves. So for me, but yeah, if I go back here, maybe I could have been a little bit more patient with breaking through. Maybe I didn't have to rush with d5. But I thought it was a good opportunity, and it just surprised me at how it fizzled out. Again, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have allowed this f5 move so easily. I maybe should have considered a move like g4. And just setting up h3, g4 would have been a good way to go, because once the pawn gets to f5, it's really hard to put pressure on e4, and a lot of my pressure is contingent upon, a lot of my play was contingent upon that e4 pressure. So anyways, that was it. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please subscribe to the channel. Additionally, this is the Road to Grandmaster series, and any financial support you can provide to help me continue and progress along the series would be incredible. So it's very difficult traveling around playing tournaments. There are a lot of expenses that go into it, and I'm doing the best I can. All right, take care. Peace.